Welcome to Doc NYC and the special Q&A for the world premiere of The Oil War. I'm Tom Powers, the festival's artistic director. I'm pleased to have with me the film's director, David Schiskal, joining us from New York City. David, you've made several films, documentaries set in the Middle East. Can you describe your evolution of work in that area?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I started. I guess the first time I really worked there was during the Second Intifada in 1990, mid 1990s in Israel, Palestine, and then I covered the the invasion of Baghdad a few years later, and for sure, both of those experiences. I mean, I think a lot of people who go to conflict zones and experience them one way or another are often, become obsessed and haunted with them. So I think especially if you like made the choice, like if you were like me and you made the choice to go there in order to tell a particular story, and as your understanding deepens, you want to go back to it again and again and again.
And well, let me ask you how you first encountered the writing of Andrew Bacevich.
Oh, I just inhale all of this kind of thing. I'm a big reader of nonfiction, especially like new versions of history. I'm interested in historiography and history. So I really read this book for pleasure. Although I knew about Andy, I mean, I'd seen Andy and I'd read some of his essays over the years. I knew who he was. But when I read his book, which is called America's War for the Greater Middle East, it was like a light bulb went off where I seeing this elephant in this particular way, I had never thought of before. And I was really taken, and I felt that it would make a wonderful film. I thought the idea of being able to do, a history of America's use of force in the Middle East in 90 minutes was super exciting. Something that could, distill this and sort of give us a look at what, what a history book might sound like in 50 years when it just devotes a paragraph to this whole set of episodes.
Can you elaborate on some of the key points that Bacevich makes that really struck a chord for you?
Well, I would say his resolute insistence on viewing these conflicts through a colonial lens, which is something that's often done by the left, by the far left, but not really done by anyone but that in this country, I don't think. Andy, though, it's also done on the far right, and Andy's sort of the man on the right originally. So I was really intrigued and engaged to see that perspective done without a lot of the other baggage that comes with that, usually in our politics, because there is there's a lot of things that go with colonialism, a lot of ways to stop talking about that and talk about other things. But Andy, I appreciated his resolute focus on it. And the fact that he was able to draw everything together into one, it's like the figure in the carpet. Suddenly I understood, it's a Henry James story where he suddenly sees the figure in the carpet, which had been hidden by all the little details, the largest figure. And that was the experience I had with the book.
So talk about the challenge of distilling this broad history into 90 minutes.
Well, it was incredibly difficult, and that was one of the reasons I liked the project. Is it seemed very, very difficult to do that, and to also not have it just be all talk. What I wanted to do is I approached it the way you might have. I wanted to approach it fundamentally the way you would approach putting together a history that was based entirely on original sources. If you were to put together like a history of the early U.S., it was just based on letters and documents. I wanted the videos that I found to sort of serve those purpose and to try to tell the story as much as I could through that original archival and with as little narration as possible, really. I wanted Andy to talk about the larger picture, but I wanted people to follow this the way it was seen at the time through these original accounts.
Can you talk more about those archival discoveries? I mean, was there any clips in this film that you were especially pleased to find?
Well, there's so many clips in this film. I mean, I spent a really heavenly, probably 9 months to a year just doing nothing but looking at old, reels of stuff from the National Archives, often raw footage that was brought to me by my wonderful archival producer, Rich Brunswick. Um, I remember, finding those practice tapes of George Bush, which I'd never seen before, and I found those, like in the middle of, like a 45 minutes of just a blank screen, and then suddenly they walk on and do something for 8 minutes, and then that's the end of the tape. When I found that footage of the prisoner of war camp during the Gulf War, to me that was really, really meaningful, because again, it was in a very sort of out of the way place. But those pictures we've gotten really good as a society, as a military, as a media, at not showing pictures like that. And I really wanted to show pictures like that. And so I was really happy that was something that I found to be really great, because we've gotten pretty good at scouring the media record, even though it doesn't seem that way. Like as a country, it's part of, I think, our overall myopia towards our involvement in the Middle East.
So, yeah, I mean, during the administration of George W. Bush, events in the Middle East were dominating headlines. In recent years, it hasn't been the case so much. A few years ago, there was probably a lot more coverage of Syria happening. These days, under the time of pandemic, what's happening in the Middle East has kind of receded from public attention, at least in the United States. I wonder, how we should interpret that, and what your film says about what we should still be paying attention to.
Well, I think that Andy's analysis of why we don't really care about what's happening there is more or less correct, which is that we don't have any skin in the game. Most people don't know anybody or are close to anybody, American or Middle Eastern, who is directly affected by this. And that's a shame. And I think that we as a country, we're ready to admit that our use of fossil fuels has, really degraded the environment, and we really want to do something about that. But I feel like we haven't, as a country, really embraced the idea that the same thing's true in the Middle East. And to try to, come to grips, just as we're trying to come to grips with our legacy of slavery, I think we're going to need to come to grips with our legacy of colonialism in the Middle East. I should say one thing about the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. There are two things. One, that there was, at the time, there was a protest movement that was saying no blood for oil. But that movement very, petered out and was taken up by the, once that president was gone and a new administration came in, everything was fine, and that movement disappeared, even though the violence continued. And there was really much more consistency between Obama and Bush than there was discontinuity, as you would have thought from reading the papers at the time. It's one of the things in the film I wanted to stress, is the continuities between all of these presidents. They're all really within a band of action that's very narrow, even though we want to see those things as like this president, this party, that party. There's actually been a consistency. I should say that at the time of the Bush administration, I was in favor of the American invasion of Iraq. And the reason was that, I'd witnessed all over the world, as everyone else had, these authoritarian dictatorships, being overthrown by people, and civil society taking control, from, the Eastern Europe to Latin America to the Philippines, all over the world. This has happened over the previous 10 years. In the Caucasus. And I felt like many people did, that if we just knocked the top off of that regime, then the civil society would come to the fore, and it would be much like many of these other post-Cold War states. And the reason that was, completely misguided was because of my own lack of recognition about, our colonial experience there. And it wasn't because I wasn't exposed to it. It was because I think I just was very much like many others in my generation in my country, and then I just didn't want to look at it. And that was one of the things I wanted to look at in making this film.
near the end of the film, Bacevich talks about meeting he had with President Obama, and expresses to an extent that the limitations of someone in power, and even the limitations of a critic like Bacevich meeting with the top person in charge to affect any change. I wonder, how you process that, and what you think about as mechanisms that could make more positive change in this area.
Well, I mean, there's two things I make of that. One is that, the Obama cabinet was populated with people like me. In many cases, some of those people I crossed paths with, the Samantha Powers of the world, people who really wanted to use American force for good in the wider world. And but the main issue for Obama is that, since Americans don't suffer from the political violence overseas, there's no political capital in ending it. It'll end because, we no longer, we get off of oil because we're afraid that our own houses are going to fall into the ocean or be flooded. And we won't need what they have anymore and we'll leave. But I just feel like, one of the things about this film, like, we don't even have we can't even call these series of events, we don't even have a name for it in the country. Some people call it the Forever Wars. Some people call it, the global war on terror. We don't even have a name for it when the name is just staring us in the face. This was the oil war. We fought it over the Middle East oil. There are more people in this country who feel like we fought it over, freedom, and fought it over, Israel, or any number of other things. So I think that if I can, to the degree that politics is downstream from culture, even if this name could find its way into the world, I think that could go a ways towards the eventual awakening we have to have about our experience there.
Well, David, thank you for taking the time. We're pleased to bring this film to its first audience at Doc NYC, and we hope it goes on to many wider audiences from here.
Well, thank you, Tom, and I want to thank Brianna and Dana, who've been really great in setting this up for us, and that's everyone down. What you guys do is amazing. It's a beautiful.
Thank you. Well, we're proud of our team.
It's a beautiful thing, the whole Doc NYC experience.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.